So today on the podcast, we have our monthly news and analysis episode. We may do 2 of these this month. And in this episode, we'll focus on the parks. First, we'll explore what's happening with Disneyland Forward in California. There is a lot of movement here. And even though Disney hasn't announced what they will actually build as part of this expansion, new environmental and noise policies with the city, which are extremely specific, outline the type of attractions that Disney can build in certain areas that it already owns in California. So we'll take a look at how these policies create a fairly specific outline as to what Disney will likely build there. And at least in terms of rides and attraction types, a lot can be extrapolated from these policies. And in the second half of our show, we'll take a look at new additions and ongoing changes at the Florida resort. In this, we have a very parks-focused episode today. So, if you're ready, let's go. To start off this month's news episode, we have a story that is reshaping the future of the Disneyland Resort area, a story that affects what Disney can and can't build in the coming years. But there's a lot more beneath the public statements. The public face of this project is a proposal that gives Disney flexibility to build attractions and other projects as they see fit on land that they already own in or near the Disneyland Resort. But beneath this are a set of very specific requirements that define far more clearly what is and what is not likely to be built in these expansion areas in the years ahead. But to get there, let's kick into the story itself. Last month, on Tuesday, April 16th, the Anaheim City Council met to consider and then vote on the Disneyland Forward plan, a proposal that, if passed, would give Disney the ability to expand the resort in certain ways. At the heart of this proposal, which had been put forward and supported by Disney, was a desire to move Disneyland from the world's best-known regional theme park into something that resembles more of a resort destination, even if the pieces of this destination are spread out over a couple of miles. To do this, Disney needed buy-in from residents of Anaheim and the City Council. For 2 years, Disney discussed the matter with residents to understand how best to move forward, especially after previous clashes with the city, led Disney to cancel a proposed upscale hotel and another parking garage, a parking garage that has also been reworked into the current proposal. From the city's perspective, there were definite pros and definite cons. Among the pros of expanding and reworking the Disney resort were additional jobs, tax revenue, and larger parks which would not only absorb more people, but hopefully feel less crowded. For decades, there's been an assumption that Disneyland and DCA have been locked into their current acreage as they're surrounded on all sides by streets. Among other things, the Disneyland Forward proposal allows Disney to build a set of bridges at the edge of each theme park to connect them to large expansion pads across a public street. The proposed expansion would require at least a $1.9 billion investment in the next decade, though the elements of that expansion haven't yet been completely defined. I might also point out that this proposed expansion should cost far more than $1.9 billion, but $1.9 billion is the minimum that Disney will commit to if the proposal is approved. Overall, this expansion should reshape the resort, giving space for multiple new themed lands and attractions. The increased size of the park should persuade more visitors to spend the night as opposed to driving in and driving out on the same day, which is how most people experience the Disneyland Resort right now. As a result, there should be additional hotel revenue for Disney and private businesses, and also additional tax income for the city. Lastly, unlike previous Disney projects, such as the Mickey and Friends parking structure and the dedicated ramps to connect the streets and the freeway, the city would not need to subsidize any of these new efforts through bonds or tax revenue. The project would be entirely paid for by Disney. But for the Anaheim City Council, there were also cons as well. Here's a short list of costs associated with the Disneyland Forward project. Many of the additional jobs would be hourly service jobs, which may not pay enough for workers to support a family or own a home. The expanded attraction areas, in addition to easing current crowding at the resort, would likely bring in millions of new visitors to the area each year, and then would require an increased level of support from police, fire, and medical organizations. A higher number of tourists may bring other problems as well, including some types of crime and elevated burdens on the freeway and road systems. Disney has agreed to help with some of these issues, particularly with open space, infrastructure improvements, and creating low-cost housing by giving the city roughly $100 million for various regional benefits. This includes $30 million for low-cost housing and $8 million for city parks, which the city can decide how best to use. This year, if approved, Disneyland would place $15 million into a city-managed trust for affordable housing. The rest Disney would contribute in the following 5 years. Both of these figures, for housing and for the parks, sound like a lot, but neither will solve the city's housing or open space concerns. For example, if an apartment complex in Anaheim costs $300 per square foot, $30 million would buy roughly a low-cost complex of about 100 units, with each unit having 1,000 square feet. So these units would mostly have 2 bedrooms each. If the $30 million was used as seed money for a larger project, it might build more. With a mortgage, where the mortgage payments come from future tenant rent, $30 million might be enough to build a 200 or even 300 unit project. The $30 million might also be leveraged in other ways by the city to eventually create more housing with additional grant funding from other sources, perhaps to build up to 500 units. But even in this, you can see that space for 500 new families, which is a high-end estimate based on the Disney contribution attracting additional grants, is not nearly enough to offset the number of new workers needed for the expanded resort. Some people in Anaheim pointed to Disney's plans in Florida to build 1,400 low or modestly priced housing units on land in Florida as a model for what Disney should do in Anaheim. If each of those units in Florida houses 4 people, that's space for nearly 6,000 individuals. But in Anaheim, the Disney company would only be contributing to solving the local problem along with the city, not fixing it themselves. Disney also agreed to manage noise levels, as this was another concern that previously had been raised. And this area is actually very important, even if it sounds a little dull up front, because it outlines what Disney can and can't build. Unlike at the Disney Resort in Florida, Disneyland is surrounded by businesses and residential areas. All indoor attractions, such as those like Small World, arranged inside of a show building, need to have their center set back at least 200 feet from any non-Disney property. Outdoor family rides, such as a merry-go-round or teacups, need to be set back at least 400 feet from non-Disney property, with a sound barrier at least 30 feet tall. Such barriers are typically in Disney parks at the periphery simply to manage visual sight lines anyway. And any thrill ride, such as an outdoor roller coaster, needs to be 550 feet from non-Disney property with similar sound barriers. To put 550 feet in perspective, this is roughly 1.5 football fields in length. I point this out because it places limits specifically on what Disney can build in various areas. Let's take a look at the Toy Story parking lot. Presently, all the images we've seen there suggest that this will be a dining, retail, and hotel development like Disney Springs in Florida. But Disney is not tied to that concept. It could now build whatever it feels will be most beneficial to the resort, including a new theme park there. But the sound requirements would limit what type of theme park attractions could be built there. The Toy Story lot is smaller even than the land used presently by DCA, by about 10 acres. The Toy Story lot is roughly 1,500 feet long by 2,000 feet wide, give or take, or roughly the length of 4 football fields by 5.5 football fields wide. So, with these proposed noise requirements as the land butts up against residential areas, the only way to have an outdoor thrill attraction on this property would be to put it in the center of the Toy Story lot. So this, just by itself, suggests that a Disney Springs type project is likely for this area, or perhaps some type of theme park with quieter rides, such as one for kids or one focused on indoor experiences. These requirements also limit what can be built over on the expansion pads by the hotels. Those are the expansion pads for Disneyland and DCA. The artwork that we've seen so far has a lot of indoor and outdoor non-thrill attractions, like those rides about to open at Fantasy Springs in Tokyo. And also, like that Avatar, the Way of Water attraction that we've recently seen, which largely takes place inside of a show building. So there may be a policy reason that Disney has been drawn to using these attractions and offering examples as to what might be built by the hotel, which is also on the west side, hemmed in by residential developments. An outdoor thrill attraction, like Wandering Oaken's Sliding Sleighs, which is part of Hong Kong's Frozen area, probably only works here if it's at least in the center or more likely toward the front, meaning toward the Disneyland side of the expansion area, to give it enough distance from the apartment complexes right behind the hotel area. Likewise, a sprawling indoor-outdoor coaster like Tron would be difficult to arrange on an expansion pad due to the proximity of the residential developments. My guess, it's far more likely that something like a clone of the Tron coaster will show up above or near Autopia, which is far from protected residential areas. In the concept art that we've presently seen for Disneyland Forward, which can and no doubt will be changed, we've been shown mostly indoor experiences and family experiences on these expansion pads. This policy about noise is likely why. So as we move forward, and as Disney settles on actual intellectual properties to frame in this area, I wouldn't expect to see anything like Big Thunder, but I would expect to see many attractions like Pirates of the Caribbean or Ariel's Undersea Adventure, as these can be built close to the property line. And toward the center or the front of these expansion areas, I'd expect to see some low-noise outdoor family attractions like the Teacups or Dumbo. Local residents will also have access to a hotline to report issues with noise, which, if noise levels are high, has the potential to be a problem for Disney. There's also a visual element to this agreement. Moving forward, Disney will build themed structures in a 360-degree fashion, so they appear finished and pleasing from outside the park. For example, Galaxy's Edge looks lovely inside the park with its spires and spaceports, but outside of the park, these same spires, seen from their backside, appear to be bare steel beams to support theme park rockwork above. Only the sections facing the park were finished. Now Disney will finish both front and back-facing sections of each development, such as with Big Thunder or the Matterhorn, so the entire creation will look like a themed structure, even those areas that can only be seen from outside of the park. As part of the agreement, Disney would agree to a minimum investment in the resort of $1.9 billion over the next 10 years, but again, I'm guessing that the investment level in the first 10 years will likely be larger than this. Let me give you a couple of examples here. Disney hasn't committed to any specific themes or attractions, but recently it floated the possibility of building a Pandora land based on the second Avatar film, The Way of Water. On previous episodes, we've already discussed why this particular development is more likely to be built on an expansion pad than somewhere inside of the existing parks, so we aren't going to rehash this here. But let's take a look at the financials. The Pandora area at Animal Kingdom cost about $500 million to build back in 2017. This would be the equivalent to about $640 million today, or about $750 million by the time such a project could be designed and opened, assuming that the design and construction timeline was 5 years and inflation remained at roughly 3%. $1.9 billion then would only cover 2 or perhaps 3 Pandora-sized developments. And remember, to build Pandora on the old Disneyland Hotel or downtown Disney parking lots, the resort also needs to build a wide pedestrian bridge, likely with theming or perhaps a covered bridge to create an enclosed portal entrance across Disneyland Drive, which is another expensive project, though the money to build the bridge likely wouldn't come out of the same pool of funds as the money to build a new themed land. With all of this, I believe it's clear at this point that Disney would like to develop more lands and attractions than could be covered by $1.9 billion. But $1.9 billion is the minimum of what Disney will guarantee without a penalty from the city. On Tuesday, April 16th, before taking a vote, the City Council listened to 8 hours of community comment on Disneyland Forward. Many of the people there were in favor of the proposal, largely as it would be an economic driver for the region. There were more people there in favor of the expansion than opposed to it, though a number of these people work for Disney, though they were there as private citizens. Those opposed to it did so mostly on the grounds that it would exacerbate current housing problems, that the Disney contribution to the city for housing wasn't large enough, and that it would increase regional traffic congestion. At 1 a.m., after the public comment segment was exhausted, long after most city council meetings end, the council finally voted. The proposal passed with unanimous support from council members. The vote was the last major hurdle for Disney to get this new multi-decade zoning plan in place. Following this, there was a finalizing vote on May 7th, but at this point, with both City Council support and support by the Planning Commission, the final vote on May 7th was little more than a procedural formality. Again, the proposal passed unanimously, which means that after a 30-day waiting period, Disney will be free to develop the resort in new ways that it couldn't in the past. But even with the council's approval, there are still challenges that Disney needs to overcome to fully implement this plan. One of them is resort area transportation. The distance from the Disneyland Hotel to the Toy Story parking lot, which is the location for that proposed Disney Springs-type retail and dining center, is about 1.5 miles, with long stretches that pass non-Disney businesses and hotels separating the two areas. Disney, for the first time, isn't now creating a unified resort, but rather a resort with 2 large satellite areas, a new parking structure on the east side of the parks, and a new dining, shopping, and hotel area near the convention center, assuming that Disney's plans for the old Toy Story lot don't change. As Disney has been arguing for zoning control and not for specific developments, they can now change their mind quite easily, and instead of building a Disney Springs-type development, they could build a certain type of theme park on that land. But to get back to the main point here, in ways, this plan of theme development mixed with general urban development is exactly what Universal is doing in Florida, where the main resort area is disconnected from more recent satellite developments, such as recently built hotels and the forthcoming Epic Universe. For both of these projects, the Disney project in California and the Universal project in Florida, one of the big challenges now is to somehow make guests still feel like they are departing urban living during their vacation, even if the fingerprints of urban life are still all around them. For Disney, this could be accomplished in California with transportation. For example, a Skyliner system could link up the various elements of the expanded Disneyland resort in such a way that Disney still controls the overall experience without guests having to walk past the 7-Eleven, CVS, and liquor store to get from DCA to the proposed Disney Springs area over by the convention center. And in an environmental report from last year, it does appear that Disney is at least considering how some type of elevated transportation, like the Skyliner or People Mover or a combination of the two, might work through this area to unify the guest experience. Another element still not fully resolved concerns the two streets that Disney would like to buy from the city. One of them is Magic Way that separates the current Mickey and Friends parking structure from the Disneyland Hotel. If Disney is allowed to purchase this street, it would have a continuous pad of land from the end of the downtown Disney parking area to the end of the Mickey and Friends parking structure, creating a massive space that could be used for theme park expansion and easy access to parking areas. Disney might keep Magic Way as a private perimeter street, one that allows access for emergency services and theme park vehicles, but by owning the street, they would control the entire area. The other street segments that Disney would like to buy appear to be positioned either to serve an east side parking area or perhaps for pylon fittings for an overhead transportation system such as the Skyliner. Again, the invisible problem in all of this is automated integrated transportation. How do you create a seamless visitor experience without asking guests to walk on city streets to move from one Disney area to the next? Also, how do you arrange an elevated transportation system to move around existing infrastructure elements, such as streetlights and high-voltage power lines, which are significant on the east side of the parks? These are big problems that still need to be solved. My money right now is on the Skyliner, which is a far less expensive type of transportation system to develop than a People Mover. Skyliners also require fewer ground supports than a People Mover system. But these are all questions for the future, maybe even the distant future. Right now, the thing to know is the zoning request has passed the City Council. Following the 1980s expansion of the Disney Resort, Disney and the city agreed to a zoning plan in which various parts of Disney's land was zoned for different purposes: amusements, hotels, dining, retail, parking, and so on. This has been, for the Disney Resort, one of their big problems over the past decade. Though Disney owns a lot of open surface parking areas around the resort, before this vote it was unable to convert them into theme park or retail space. They had to remain parking lots. This vote removes those restrictions, giving Disney a great deal of flexibility in how they expand the land they presently own, again with that caveat about noise and requirements for building structures. The simplified version of this plan is this: Disney will build new multi-level parking structures that will then free up dozens and dozens of acres presently used for surface parking, which then can be turned into new theme park areas or a district devoted to shopping, dining, and perhaps some mixed-use hotel developments, similar to how large sections of Disney's Grand Californian are perched above stores and restaurants in downtown Disney. The easiest expansion here, as it excludes complicated transportation systems, would be to convert the parking areas by the Disneyland Hotel into theme park spaces and also to build those pedestrian bridges. The more difficult expansion would be to build a new development on the Toy Story parking lot and then to arrange some type of dedicated transportation system to connect it up to the center of the Disneyland Resort. So if I had to guess how all this will work moving forward, it would likely be with some announcement at the D23 event this coming August to show what might be built on part of these parking areas, which I'm guessing would include the Avatar area. If I had to pick a large second project that might be announced, it would be a California version of the Frozen themed lands. There are multiple Frozen lands now for overseas parks, so there would be a lower development cost to clone elements from them into California. Also, Frozen is a safe pick, as there are 2 more Frozen films being developed, which means that the franchise will remain relevant for many years moving forward. Anyway, these 2 projects would be at the top of my list of guesses for what might be announced: the Avatar project and a Frozen project. And then sometime later, Perhaps even a decade later, after Disney has expanded out the park capacity for Disneyland and DCA, they might focus on how to develop that distant Toy Story lot and connect it up with the rest of the resort. Remember, this current plan lasts for 40 years, and not everything is going to be built in the first 10. But to close this up, let me say this. In terms of Disney's relationship with governmental bodies, we are finally at a point where large announcements are now possible, both in California and Florida. With an agreement between the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District and Disney, ending or at least pausing various lawsuits, Disney World can now expand with an understanding that the special district there will support their work. And with this vote for Disneyland Forward, the California resort will soon be in a place where it too can announce various expansion projects. Again, I'd expect these projects to be slowly revealed over many years. For the expansion pads, infrastructure such as bridges are necessary to connect those areas with the main theme park, so I don't expect anything to open there for many years, perhaps 2028 at the earliest. But there's a path now on both coasts for larger developments. In Florida, new Disney projects need to finally answer Epic Universe, and in California, these projects will be an economic engine to further expand the resort area around Disney and deepen revenue for the city of Anaheim. And with this, there's also now the possibility for some very interesting announcements to take place in August at the D23 event in Anaheim. But that right now is still many months away. Now, let's shift our focus over to Florida, where we have a number of updates. First on this list is the restaurant 1900 Park Fare, which after a 4-year-plus closure, finally reopened at the Grand Floridian this past month. This is a character buffet that serves breakfast and dinner. It closed with the pandemic back in 2020, and it is the last of the large restaurants to come back after COVID. Before the pandemic, 1900 Park Fare was focused largely on the Cinderella story, with those stepsisters getting in a row as they sauntered through the dining room. And after the pandemic, it is now focused on characters who make a wish. This is a very loose theme, as I feel over half of the Disney animated features could be arranged under this banner. But in the mix are 4 walk-around characters. As with the previous version of Park Fare, these characters are all face characters: Aladdin, Cinderella, Mirabelle, and Tiana. Tiana is dressed in a costume similar to the one the animatronic will soon wear in the attraction over in the Magic Kingdom. I think this is the first time a walk-around character is dressed to match an attraction that is not yet opened. All of the other characters are dressed to match their appearance on screen. One of the strengths of this restaurant is that the cast members here who play these characters stay deeply inside their roles, so the experience, especially for kids, is something that feels like an actual one-on-one conversation with figures from animated films. The food here overall, like that of most Disney buffets, is a mixed bag. Some items are very good and some items a little less so. Among the standouts, though, are the chicken and andouille gumbo, which is the featured dish from Princess and the Frog, the one that Tiana makes with her father in the movie. The roasted garlic sausage is quite good, as is the baked salmon with lemon butter. Surprisingly, salmon on most Disney buffets turns out reasonably well. There's a carving station with 2 meats. One of the meats is always prime rib, another standout on the menu. The other meat rotates through the week, often it's turkey. But on Wednesdays it's porchetta, which by the pound is a more expensive offering than prime rib. But still here I prefer the prime rib, which was nicely seasoned. For longtime fans of the resort, Park Fare has brought back a Grand Floridian staple, the strawberry soup, which is a dessert. It is a heavy cream and yogurt-based soup that you can top with fresh berries and whipped cream. The environment inside the restaurant is very close to the traditional setup for a park fare, though the upper walls are now dressed with portraits of animated characters who seek a wish. This includes Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Geppetto, and so on. The venue, I'll point out, would be a little more elegant and inviting, especially at dinner, if the light levels were lower, but I also understand the need for full lighting, especially as kids follow after the characters, often running between tables. The dinner charge is on the higher side for Disney meals, $66 for adults and $41 for kids 9 and under. To be completely transparent here, I'm not sure that the menu, even with some excellent character interactions, rises to the point of a $66 charge. That's over $260 without drinks for a group of 4, with a typical meal lasting just over an hour. But if you're on the traditional Disney dining plan, $1,900 park fare is a good deal. We've estimated that a table service credit is worth about $57. At park fare, you can get the $66 meal and a $17 cocktail for one table service credit, which is just over a 30% discount versus paying for that meal with cash. But for me, the absolute highlight of dining at park fare is that one of the original 1971 cast members works here. On his name tag, it will just say Wayne. He started at Disney World in November 1971, working in parking. Then he moved to monorails, then watercraft, then the Magic Kingdom, before transferring into food service, which is where he has been for decades. At the Hoop-de-Doo, over in the Germany Pavilion, and now in the reopened park fare. In 2021, for the resort's 50th anniversary, management invited 23 original and still working cast members to have their photo taken before the castle. But since 2021, about half of those remaining original cast members have retired. There are now just 12 who have been at the resort continuously for over 52 years. For me, talking with Wayne was the highlight of dining at park fare at dinner. If you see him there, he's part of their extremely helpful waitstaff. Make sure to say hi. He's part of the resort's history that stretches back to its opening year. Next up, we have 3 stories from Disney Springs. The first one is about a lack of precipitation in a state where usually there's more than enough rain. Though for large sections of the U.S., 2024 has been an unusually rainy year, Central Florida somewhat oddly has sections that, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, are either unusually dry or in the first stages of a drought. Parts of Osceola County are in the first stages of a drought, while Orange County is listed as unusually dry. This has created a unique situation where some lakes in Florida, despite being in a tropical environment, have unusually low water levels. This has been a significant problem on the canals that connect Disney Springs to the Old Key West and Port Orleans resorts. Disney Springs is arranged around Lake Buena Vista. This lake, in a smaller form, was there when Disney bought the land back in the mid-1960s, but it's since been widened. The middle of the lake remains about 30 feet deep, but the canals that connect up Disney Springs to those upriver resorts are largely man-made. In the past couple of months, water levels in some places have become so low that birds can stand on their back legs in the middle of a canal. Those Disney-owned Sassagoula riverboats, designed as guest transportation, have bottomed out and have become stuck. At least one boat broke a propeller. If you look at bridge supports in the area, you can see how much lower water levels are now. Because of this, Disney has stopped guest watercraft on the canals, which means that, at least for a while, guests at Old Key West and Port Orleans need to take a bus back and forth to Disney Springs. This area, quite simply, needs a lot of rain before water levels are again high enough to begin boat operations. The rainy season typically starts in mid-May, but it will take many months to refill the lake and the canals. So the boats, at least right now, are mostly docked, perhaps until mid-June, maybe a bit later. If you see a Sascagoula boat out on Lake Buena Vista, where the water is deep, it's not to transport guests. The resort is taking this opportunity to train cast members to become pilots so that when service does reopen, they'll have more people trained to manage the river fleet. On the far side of Disney Springs, beyond the Cirque du Soleil Theater, a staging area has now been created for the Dreams That Soar drone show. Disney has used drones recently at overseas parks. They briefly used a few drones at Animal Kingdom, and back during the winter holidays of 2016, they arranged a drone show at Disney Springs. But liability issues have largely kept drones out of the American parks. What appears to be the issue is safe flyover space. The solution at Disney Springs now is to create a staging area beyond the west side surface parking area. This area is also called the Strawberry Parking Lot, and in case you haven't memorized the fruit-themed names of the Disney Springs parking areas, think of it this way. If you're standing next to Cirque du Soleil at the very end of Disney Springs, just look across the surface parking lot. There at the far end is now a fenced-off area, a big rectangular box made from chain-link fencing with a green scrim that encloses a very large staging area for drones right beside the water. There's a footpath there and a little bit of grass next to the lake, but at night, starting on May 24th, the path and grass area will be closed off to create a safe entry and egress point for the drones, and there will be hundreds of drones to fly over and perform above the center of the lake. For Disney, this closed path solves the problem of safe passage for the drones, as they will never fly above or near guests. Disney has set up a line of new speakers along the edge of the water based on speaker locations. It appears that the space behind the House of Blues and Haleo are going to be some prime viewing spots, but there are a few speakers all the way over by Saratoga Springs, so the viewing area should cover most waterside locations at Disney Springs. I've talked to people working on this show. On-site testing is not supposed to happen until about a week before the show premieres on May 24th. Though you can certainly expect that testing is happening elsewhere right now. Drones in Central Florida are clearly the nighttime entertainment du jour, as another drone show will be happening over at Universal this summer as well. The Universal show also kicks off on May 24th, so it'll be a busy night for low-flying craft in Central Florida. Lastly, we've talked about the restaurant Eat, that's EET, previously on this podcast. Eat is an Indian restaurant at the far end of the marketplace area of Disney Springs. Eat is modestly priced. The food is good, but the location is less than ideal. It's right by the exit that leads to the walking path that curves over to Saratoga Springs, or to put this another way, it's near the year-round Christmas store. And if you aren't sure where any of those things are, well, that is exactly the problem. Despite good food, it's in an area that most people don't frequent. Think of the menu at Eat as a quick-service version of Sanaa. The featured item at Eat is similar to a Journey Bowl at Sanaa. They also have a non-bread service. Bowls are maybe 60% of the cost of those at Sanaa, but again, it's quick service. An order of garlic naan is $7, and over at Sanaa, it's a lot more. Anyway, to drive more business over to the end of the marketplace, Eat now has a happy hour where all alcoholic beverages are 50% off from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. in the afternoon. every day, including weekends. Other restaurants also have happy hours at Disney Springs, but I think the $4 happy hour beer is now the cheapest beer anywhere at Disney Springs or really on Disney property. Cocktails are about $6 during that same time frame. And if you do order a bowl while you're there, get the paneer, which is an Indian buffalo milk cheese. It's fabulous. In our last segment today, we're going to loop over to the Magic Kingdom. The big news is at the back of the park. Tiana's Bayou Adventure now has an opening date. We've been saying for a while that various operations, marketing, and installation schedules have suggested a late June or perhaps early July opening date. We now have a date that falls right in the center of that window. The public opening of Tiana's Bayou Adventure will be Friday, June 28th, but to be fully transparent here, I had honestly been eyeing about a week to 10 days before this to coincide with the last set of public schools to get out for the summer, such as in Boston or Washington, D.C., when the national school break is really in full swing. I would assume that for most of the summer, maybe even longer, Tiana's Bayou Adventure will be both a virtual queue and a paid lightning lane, similar to other recent openings. Scaffolding is now down around the mountain. Workers are finishing up a few small exterior details, such as winding vines around decorative fences and completing the queue area. But the vast majority of public-facing work is now done. Decorative lights line the entrance area. Hardscape in the queue has been ornamented with stone mosaics of lilies worked into the ground, and various murals now appear to be finished. The flume has been filled and emptied many times, with logs splashing down every few days. Most impressively, the mountain now has a new light package for night, which has been tested over the previous couple of weeks, and it is gorgeous. I'm posting this on Sunday, May 12th. At this time, there have been no announcements for Annual Pass, DVC, Golden Oak, Club 33, or even cast member previews. But also, I took a good look at the construction area a few days ago, and I can see that there are still significant areas to finish, especially in the outdoor queue, before this attraction can open. The opening date at this point is 47 days away. A traditional rollout would begin somewhere around June 1st, with previews for various groups, including cast members. I have no doubt that this attraction can be completed in 47 days, but to complete it in just 20 days for traditional previews, at least from what I saw this past Tuesday, seems like a stretch. So perhaps there might be a shortened or alternative preview schedule from what we've seen with recent attractions such as Tron. Again, this is only an educated guess, but I doubt there is time for both traditional previews and for media previews. There may be a very short preview window for cast members or annual pass holders. There may be a hard ticket D23 preview, as there was for Tron. I'm guessing, however, most of the time available for previews will be given over to media, not to traditional groups associated with Disney. My guess is that some aspect of testing or some issue that occurred during testing pushed back the timeline a little bit more than anticipated. Still, though, we now have a firm date for the opening of Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And to close things out over in Storybook Circus at the back of Fantasyland, a small experience opened a little over a week ago. Smell-Elephants on Parade, which are a set of 8 statues modeled after the elephants in the Pink Elephants on Parade segment of Dumbo. The statues are each around 6 feet tall and situated on raised bases, which have mesh wiring behind which are either scented beads or oil. In some attractions at Disney World, to create aromatic atmospheres, such as in Pirates, Disney uses solids, such as scent beads or balls. In others, such as Soaring, it uses liquids. I'm not entirely sure what's being used here. But from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., a kiosk area is open where guests can receive a map and stickers so they can place the correct scent sticker on each section of the map. So what do I like? And what maybe still needs a little work here? Well, this is another attempt to include play, which actively involves guests, particularly young guests, into the theme parks, as opposed to entertainment, which is largely passively watched or enjoyed by guests. This is one of the big shifts that I've seen over the past 4 or 5 years in the American parks. Toontown out in California is now a very expensive, very inventive playground. Some of that same DNA is beneath this walk-through area in Storybook Circus as it involves guest interactions. Also, the addition of the elephants has been a fabulous excuse to freshen up and repaint many, but not all areas around Storybook Circus. Some areas, such as down by the train depot, now look absolutely fabulous. Lastly, I love that these elephants and some additional decorations point to early Disney films overseen by Walt. When most recent Disney offerings in the American parks point to Frozen, Coco, Brave, and The Princess and the Frog, I find it delightful to see images related to earlier and excellent animation layered also into the park. And it's not just Dumbo here. There are recently added nods in the Storybook Circus train depot to Fantasia, the Three Little Pigs, and even the anthology film from the 1940s, Melody Time. All of it arranged into decorative luggage. And so, I like that the company is taking a much wider look at its deep film history as it can be presented in the parks. But here now is the big shortcoming. I was only able to smell 2 of the 8 aromas, from cotton candy to popcorn to churro to bubblegum and so on. The 2 I could smell were fabulous, but I was there midday long after the park opened, so I'm not sure that all 8 statues were fully functioning. Also, these elephants were arranged in recently landscaped areas which had also been recently mulched to finish off the garden redesign. So most everything everywhere smelled just like mulch. Maybe that caramel apple scent was resting just beneath the scent of mulch, who knows. But even if you can't locate the scent, the 8 elephants are dressed and colored like the food they represent. The corn dog elephant, for example, is golden brown with lines of ketchup red and mustard yellow crossing its body. If you can identify or guess all 8 scents, either from smell or sight, you get an additional sticker as you leave the area. Hopefully, the issue with the scents and perhaps that fresh mulch fixes itself in a week or 2. But Smellephants are now open, and their inclusion in the park also reveals that some of those active play areas that have been proliferating out at Disneyland and DCA in California, particularly for kids, are now being embedded at the Magic Kingdom in Florida as well. Disneyland has a large base of local residents, parents whose kids may be more interested in playing in Goofy's yard than in going on the Matterhorn one more time, so it makes a lot of sense that Disneyland is pivoting more towards interactive play. The big locals area at Disney World is Epcot. Outside of that, though, the Florida resort is far more centered on traditional tourism. And so here, I'm guessing, Disney is now experimenting to see if installations focused on interactive play will prove as popular in the parks with traditional tourists as they have in California with a local audience who regularly visits the parks. Before this, the playground-type areas at Disney World have largely been arranged into the hotel resort areas. And with that, we've now covered most of the key stories for the past month that affect the California and Florida resorts. But as I mentioned back at the start of this episode, there are still a couple of other stories that we'll likely cover later this month. At this point, you are now all caught up, at least with news about the parks for the current month. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just 2 things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly supporters. On Bandcamp, you will find well over 200 episodes not available in iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link to Bandcamp down in our show notes. So, until next week, this is Todd James Pierce.